The air in our old house used to carry secrets, especially around Christmas. Not the kind you whisper behind cupped hands, but the kind that settles in the dust motes dancing in the beam of light from the living room window. The kind that hides in the creak of the floorboards just before the stairs. The kind that clings to the edges of a memory you can't quite place, but know, deep down, is important. It's funny how some moments, some sensations, get etched into you like frost on a winter pane. Clear and sharp one minute, blurry and indistinct the next. And for me, there's one such moment, one scent, one feeling, that arrives faithfully every December. Even now, long after the house is just a photograph in a frame, long after the laughter has faded into the static of memory. It's the scent of pine needles, crushed underfoot, mingling with the artificial, slightly chemical smell of the fake Christmas tree my parents always insisted on. Not because they couldn't afford a real one. Mind you, my dad had this strange pride about never needing the real thing when a perfectly adequate imitation would do. He called it practicality. I called it missing the point. But that scent, that unique blend of manufactured greenery and something vaguely like disinfectant, was the official kickoff. It meant the decorations would come out, the wrapping paper would be unfolded with a crinkly sigh, and the annual pilgrimage to the attic for the box of ornaments, each one a tiny, glittering capsule of a year gone by, would begin. My mother, bless her heart, she had a knack for turning even the most mundane object into something festive. A plain glass ornament would get a dousing of glitter, a stray bead or two glued haphazardly to it, maybe a tiny ribbon bow knotted with the deftness of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. She'd tell us stories about each one as we hung them on the flimsy branches of the fake tree. There was the angel my grandmother had made, the faded red ball from my first Christmas, the slightly lopsided snowflake my younger brother had tried to paint when he was 4 and decided silver was the color of everything. Each ornament was a piece of the tapestry, a thread connecting us across time. Except there was always one spot. Year after year, nestled almost deliberately between the spires of a plastic pine cone and the jagged edge of a metal star, was an empty space. Not just any empty space, mind you. It was a specific one, right there on the upper right branch, maybe 2/3 of the way up. My mother would hang the last ornament, sigh contentedly, step back, and her eyes would always drift there, just for a second. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker, like a glitch in a perfectly programmed routine. Then she'd smooth down her dress, maybe adjust the angel on top of the tree, and the moment would pass unspoken. I noticed it first when I was maybe 8 or 9. I asked her about it, all wide-eyed innocence. "Mommy, why isn't there an ornament there?" I remember the exact question like it was branded on my memory. She just smiled a little too quickly and patted my head. "Oh, that's just reserved for something special." Reserved for what? I never got an answer. It became a little game in my head, trying to guess what this special ornament could be. A diamond one? A solid gold one shaped like a reindeer? Maybe a magical one that would grant wishes? My imagination ran wild. Every Christmas morning, my eyes would scan the tree first for the presence of this phantom ornament, a silent participant in the joyous chaos. As I got older, the mystery deepened, tinged with a hint of unease. Why keep an empty space year after year? It wasn't like we were short on ornaments. The box in the attic was bursting at the seams with glass, plastic, and even some porcelain baubles collected over 2 decades. It felt like a deliberate omission, a hole punched in the festive perfection. I started asking again, maybe not with the same innocent wonder, but with the burgeoning curiosity of adolescence. "So what's the story with that spot, Mom?" Her answers became evasive, deflecting with a change of subject or a vague wave of the hand. "It's just a tradition, family thing. That only made it worse. What kind of tradition involves an empty box? Or maybe, in this case, an empty spot meant to hold a box that was never opened. The scent of that fake pine, that peculiar Christmas smell unique to our house, always brought it back. Even now, decades later, walking into a store and catching the whiff of artificial evergreen in the air during December, it transports me. Not just to the living room with the tree lit up, reflecting on the polished wooden floor, but specifically to that spot on the tree, that lingering emptiness. It's a phantom limb of memory, a sensation that something vital is missing, even though I never knew what it was supposed to be in the first place. It's the ghost of a gift never given, a presence never felt, a story never told. I remember one Christmas, maybe when I was 14, I was helping my dad put the tree up. He was assembling the flimsy branches, grumbling about the instructions, which were usually a jumble of pictograms that made no sense. I was carefully arranging the ornaments my mom had laid out on the coffee table, trying to decide which ones looked best where. My eyes kept straying to that spot. I felt a surge of defiance, a teenage need to unravel mysteries, to fill voids. I went to the attic without asking, found the big green plastic storage bin labeled Christmas ornaments, and rooted through it. I pulled out dozens of perfectly good ornaments. A shiny silver bell, a glittery snowman, a delicate blue bird. None of them felt right. None of them felt like the special one my mother had hinted at. I even considered taking one, just placing it there, pretending the mystery was solved. But something held me back. A sense of disrespect, or maybe just the fear of getting caught. I put everything back, the mystery as intact as ever, perhaps even more deeply embedded in my psyche. The years passed. My brothers and I grew up, moved away, started our own families. The fake tree stayed, a silent witness to shrinking crowds, until eventually it too was relegated to the attic, gathering dust alongside the ornaments. The house changed hands, the furniture was sold, the memories faded, layer by layer. Yet every December that scent, that specific blend of fake pine and something indefinable, still found me. Sometimes it was in a department store, sometimes in a neighbor's home, sometimes just a fleeting whiff on the street after someone had just put up their artificial tree. And each time, without fail, my mind would drift back to that empty space on the tree. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It felt like an echo, a persistent question mark hovering over my childhood. What was in that box? Or was there even a box? Maybe the gift was never wrapped at all. Maybe it was just the idea of a gift, the anticipation, that was the tradition. It feels absurd, doesn't it? To carry a mystery like that for so long, a mystery centered around something as simple, as common, as a Christmas ornament. But sometimes, the smallest things hold the biggest weights. The unopened box under the tree, the forgotten word, the glance that wasn't returned. These are the things that linger. These are the things that shape us in quiet ways we rarely acknowledge until years later, when the scent of crushed pine needles suddenly fills the air once more. It's not just about the ornament, though. Or perhaps it is about the ornament, but in a way that's much bigger than glass and glitter. It's about the unspoken things in families, the secrets we keep not necessarily out of malice, but out of habit, out of a desire to protect, out of a fear of what might happen if the truth comes out. It's about expectations, both given and received, about the weight we carry in trying to meet them, or the burden we feel when they seem impossible to fulfill. It's about the presence or absence of love and how we measure it, often mistakenly, in material things. It's about the legacy we pass down, sometimes intentionally, sometimes accidentally, and how even the smallest tradition, even one shrouded in mystery, can become a part of who we are. That empty spot on the tree, it became a symbol for me. Not just of a missing ornament, but of something missing in general. Something intangible, yet profoundly felt. A piece of the puzzle that defined my family's Christmas, a piece that was always just out of reach. It represented the questions that went unanswered, the stories that went untold, the connections that felt slightly askew. And as I got older, I began to wonder if the mystery wasn't the point all along. Maybe the empty space wasn't meant to be filled. Maybe it was meant to be felt. The house is gone now, the tree is long since broken down, the ornaments are scattered among my siblings. But every year, around this time, I still picture that living room, bathed in the soft glow of the artificial tree lights. I still smell that strange, familiar scent, and I still feel that pull, that nudge towards understanding. Not just about the ornament, but about the family, about the love that was there, in all its complicated, imperfect glory, even with the empty box waiting in the wings. It's a strange kind of inheritance, isn't it? This mystery. It's not something you can unwrap or display on a shelf. It's more like a shadow, something you walk around, something that shapes the space around you even when you can't quite see its edges. It's a whisper in the silence between Christmas carols, a question mark hovering over the feast, a presence felt in the absence. And I've carried it with me for so long, this question of what was supposed to be in that box, what was supposed to occupy that space on the tree. What was it? Was it a mistake? A forgotten purchase? A gift intended for someone who wasn't there? Or was it something more deliberate? Something symbolic? Something that my parents, in their own quiet, complicated ways, were trying to teach us, year after year, ornament by ornament, through that single, stubborn emptiness? The truth, I suspect, is buried deeper than that. Deeper than any ornament, deeper than any gift. It's tangled up in the fabric of their marriage, in the unspoken tensions, in the love that endured despite its flaws. And maybe, just maybe, the emptiness wasn't meant to be filled with an object at all. Maybe it was always meant to be filled with something else entirely. That scent, it's back again now, isn't it? Filling the room, reminding me. It's the scent of pine needles, crushed underfoot, mingling with the artificial, slightly chemical smell of a Christmas long ago. It's the scent of unanswered questions, of ghosts that linger, of a mystery that refuses to be buried, even in memory. And it brings me back to the beginning, to the whisper of an unopened gift from childhood, a story that's still waiting to be told, a story that starts with an empty box. Querido espectador, confira si vocer ainda está inscrito no canal, às vezes, sua inscrição pode ser cancelada automaticamente, então e acute sempre bom dar uma olhadinha. Aproveite também para se tornar membro do canal. Como membro, vocer terá benefícios incríveis, como assistir aos nossos conteúdos sem anuncios. Além disso, vocer pode apoiar nosso trabalho sendo financiador do canal com valor. Sua ajuda nos permite investir em ferramentas melhores e elevar ainda mais a qualidade de produção dos nossos conteúdos. Junte-se a nós nessa jornada e faça parte da nossa comunidade. E deixe nos comentários a cidade de onde vocer está escutando essa história e que horas são aí na sua localidade. Vamos adorar saber. But that's just the beginning. The story of the empty box, the empty space on the tree, it goes deeper than that. It's about more than just an ornament. It's about secrets and silence and the weight we carry when we don't know the whole story. It's about what we expect from those we love and what they expect from us. It's about the promises we make, even when we don't speak them aloud, and the presence that matters more than any gift we could ever give or receive. And it all starts with that one, single emptiness, year after year, reminding us that some stories aren't about what's present, but about what's missing. And that perhaps is where the real mystery begins. Querido espectador, confira si vocer ainda está inscrito no canal. Às vezes, a inscrição pode ser cancelada automaticamente, então e acute sempre bom verificar. Aproveite e se torna membro do canal. Como membro, vocer terá benefícios incríveis, como assistir aos nossos conteúdos sem anuncios. Além disso, vocer pode apoiar nosso trabalho sendo financiador do canal com valor. Sua ajuda nos permite investir em ferramentas melhores e elevar a qualidade de produção dos nossos conteúdos. Junte-se a nós nessa jornada e faça parte da nossa comunidade. E conta pra gente aí nos comentários de que cidade vocer está escutando esta história e que horas são por aí agora. The empty box. It wasn't just any box, mind you. It wasn't shoved away in a corner, forgotten like last year's fruitcake. No, this box had a place of honor, or perhaps infamy, right there under the tree, nestled between the brightly wrapped presents for my brothers and me and the slightly lopsided package for my father. It was always the same size, the same plain brown cardboard, never festively adorned with ribbons or bows. Sometimes my mother would tape a simple, handwritten tag to it, just a name, no occasion, no message. Sometimes there wasn't even a tag. It just sat there, a silent sentinel in the midst of the festive chaos, a question mark wrapped in craft paper. I remember the first year I truly registered its existence. I must have been around 10. The morning of Christmas Day, the air thick with excitement, the scent of pine and coffee, and the faint, sugary smell of my mother's famous sugar cookies baking in the kitchen. We'd ripped through our presents like wolves tearing into prey, new comic books, G.I. Joe action figures, board games that would inevitably cause arguments later that day. Everything was accounted for, everything was opened, everything was there, except for that one box. It sat untouched, undisturbed, almost challenging us with its stubborn emptiness. My brothers, bless their impulsive hearts, tried to pry it open. My younger brother, Tim, took a butter knife to the tape, his expression a mixture of curiosity and frustration. My older brother, Mark, just stared at it, a frown creasing his forehead. But neither of them touched it for long. There was something off about it, something that made even their curious fingers hesitate. It wasn't just another present. It felt like a placeholder, a void deliberately placed in the midst of abundance. Later that morning, after the initial flurry of gift-giving had subsided, after the turkey had been carved and the eggnog had been poured, my mother finally addressed it. She didn't come right out and say, "This is the mysterious empty box," but she did something that made its presence undeniable. She picked it up, holding it carefully as if it contained something fragile, something precious, something that couldn't be damaged by the simple act of unwrapping. She carried it into the living room, away from the noise of the kitchen, away from the laughing, talking guests who had started to filter in. She sat on the couch, the box resting on her lap, and just held it. I watched her from the doorway, my own curiosity piqued, my childhood sense of wonder suddenly tinged with a strange sort of unease. Why wasn't she opening it? What was the point of a gift that wasn't meant to be opened? It felt like a joke, a riddle, a test. My mind raced. Was it a practical joke? Did she forget what was inside? Was it a metaphor? For what, I couldn't even begin to guess. My father noticed me watching, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way they always did when he was about to say something cryptic. "Patience, young grasshopper," he'd say, mimicking a calmness he rarely felt. Some things aren't meant to be rushed. He didn't look at the box, didn't acknowledge its presence, but his words felt like they were directed at it, at the silence it represented. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a few minutes, my mother stood up. She carried the box back into the kitchen, where my father was clearing the dinner plates, humming a tune that didn't quite match the holiday spirit. She placed the box on the counter, next to the sink, and for a moment, they just stood there, side by side, looking at it. There was no conversation, no explanation, just a shared glance that spoke volumes, or perhaps said nothing at all. It was the first time I truly felt the weight of the mystery. It wasn't just a forgotten ornament on the tree anymore. It was a physical presence, a tangible enigma that sat under the tree year after year, a silent witness to our family's celebrations, our arguments, our joys. It was a symbol, but of what I could fathom. The next year, the pattern repeated. The box appeared under the tree, plain and unassuming. We opened our presents, the usual excitement, the usual arguments over whose turn it was to play with the new toy. And then, inevitably, the pause. The moment when the noise would die down, when everyone would look around and their eyes would land on that box. It was like a silent cue, a signal that the main event wasn't quite over. This time, my mother didn't wait until after dinner. She picked up the box during the afternoon while we were still unwrapping the bulk of our gifts. She took it into the living room, sat on the armchair that smelled faintly of her perfume and old books, and just sat with it. She didn't open it. She didn't even touch the wrapping. She just held it on her lap, her fingers occasionally tracing the edges of the cardboard, as if trying to conjure something from the emptiness. I remember sitting on the floor, playing with my new Lego set, my eyes constantly drawn to her, to the box. I felt like I was in on a secret, but also like I was being kept out of one. It was maddening. I wanted to ask, to demand an explanation, but something held me back. A sense of reverence, perhaps. A feeling that this was something sacred, something that couldn't be questioned, couldn't be rushed. Later that day, after the presents were all opened and the wrapping paper was strewn across the living room floor like fallen leaves, my mother finally opened the box. But she didn't open the wrapping. She just lifted the lid. And inside, there was nothing, absolutely nothing. We all stared. My brothers looked confused, then amused. My father just nodded, a knowing look in his eyes that said he understood or thought he did. But my mother, she looked content. Peaceful, even. She closed the lid, placed the box back on the floor, and for a moment, we all just stood there in silence, pondering the absurdity of it all. "What was that about?" Tim finally asked, breaking the silence. My mother just smiled, that same smile she used to give me when I was a child and asked about the empty spot on the tree. "It's just something we do," she said. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. "A tradition." "A tradition of an empty box?" Mark laughed, but there was no real humor in it. "Exactly," she said. "A tradition of an empty box." And that was that. No further explanation, no deeper meaning offered. Just the quiet acceptance of something that defied logic, something that felt both pointless and profound all at once. The mystery deepened, shifting from a simple question of what's in the box to something much more complex, something that touched on the very nature of tradition, of meaning, of the things we do simply because we've always done them. The years kept passing. The box kept appearing. Sometimes it was opened earlier, sometimes later. Sometimes it was placed on the coffee table instead of the floor, but it was always there. Always empty. Always a source of quiet contemplation for my mother, a source of quiet confusion for the rest of us. I started to wonder about its origins. Where did it come from? Was it something my parents had started, or was it a tradition passed down from their own parents? Did it have any real meaning, or was it just a quirky habit that had somehow taken root in our family's Christmas ritual? I asked my mother again, years later, when I was in college and visiting home for the holidays. She looked at me, her eyes clouded with a memory I couldn't quite grasp. "It's complicated," she said, her voice softer this time, almost hesitant. "It's something your father and we needed." Needed? Needed what? An empty box? It still didn't make sense, but I didn't press her. Some questions, I realized, were better left unanswered. Some mysteries were better felt than understood. And so, the tradition continued. The empty box under the tree, a silent reminder that not everything in life makes sense, that not every tradition has a logical explanation, that sometimes the most profound moments are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers. It was a lesson in acceptance, in the beauty of the unexplained, in the idea that some things are meant to remain mysteries, not because they're difficult to solve, but because they're meant to be felt, to be experienced, to be passed down through the generations without the need for a concrete explanation. The scent of pine needles, crushed underfoot, still fills the air whenever I think of that box. It's the scent of Christmas, yes, but it's also the scent of unanswered questions, of secrets kept, of traditions upheld without quite knowing why. And every year, as the holidays approach, I find myself thinking about that empty box, wondering if I'll ever truly understand its significance, wondering if I even need to. Maybe, just maybe, the mystery is the point. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most beautiful part of it all. Maybe the empty box isn't about what's missing, but about what's present in its absence. Maybe it's about the love that doesn't need a gift to be expressed, the tradition that doesn't need a reason to be continued, the memory that doesn't need an explanation to be cherished. But that's just the beginning. The story of the empty box, the empty space on the tree, it goes deeper than that. It's about more than just an ornament, more than just a tradition. It's about the unspoken things in families, the secrets we keep, the expectations we carry, the love we feel even when we can't quite put it into words. It's about the weight of the past, the uncertainty of the present, and the hope we hold on to for the future. And it all starts with that one, single emptiness, year after year, reminding us that some stories aren't about what's present, but about what's missing. And that, perhaps, is where the real mystery begins, the box. That stubborn, silent box under the tree. It wasn't just an object anymore. It was a presence, a question mark hovering over our family gatherings, a symbol of something deeper, something hidden. As the years went by, and I grew from a child into a teenager, and then into a young adult, my curiosity about it didn't fade. It just transformed, morphing from simple wonder into a persistent ache, a need to know what lay beneath that plain brown paper, what secret it held, why it remained perpetually, deliberately empty. I started paying closer attention to the details. I noticed how my mother's hands would tremble just slightly when she picked it up, not from nerves, but from a kind of reverence, as if handling something sacred, something fragile despite its empty interior. I noticed how my father's gaze would linger on it for a moment when he thought no one was looking, a look that wasn't exactly sad, but wasn't exactly happy either. It was a look filled with something complex, something I couldn't quite decipher. I noticed the whispers, too. Not actual words, but the hushed tones, the sideways glances exchanged between my parents when they thought we weren't paying attention. There was a shared understanding there, a connection that went beyond the surface-level interactions of everyday life. It was as if the empty box was a code word, a secret handshake, a symbol of a bond that was both profound and painful, something that tied them together in a way that we, their children, couldn't fully grasp. One Christmas Eve, when I was 17, the house was unusually quiet. My brothers were out with friends, caught up in the pre-holiday excitement, and my parents were in the living room, watching a movie, their voices low and muffled through the closed door. I couldn't sleep, the usual pre-holiday jitters mixed with a growing sense of unease about the box. It was sitting under the tree, as usual, a stark contrast to the brightly wrapped presents surrounding it. I tiptoed down the hall, my slippers silent on the polished wooden floor. I could hear the muffled sounds of the movie, the occasional laugh, the rustle of blankets. I paused outside the door, listening. Then I heard it. A soft sob, quickly stifled, followed by a gentle murmur. My mother's voice, low and thick with emotion. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Grief, sadness, a deep, aching pain that cut through the festive air like a shard of ice. My heart pounded against my ribs. Was it about the box? About me? About something else entirely? I felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of protectiveness and intrusive curiosity. I wanted to barge in, demand answers, unravel the mystery once and for all. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, listening to the silent movie playing in the background, the sounds of my mother's quiet distress echoing in the stillness. After a few more minutes, the sounds subsided. The movie ended, I assumed, and silence fell again. I lingered outside the door for a moment longer, my mind racing, before deciding it was time to retreat. I went back to my room, the image of my mother's quiet grief lodging itself in my mind, adding another layer of complexity to the mystery of the empty box. It wasn't just a quirky tradition anymore. It was tied to something painful, something my mother carried with her, something that surfaced every year around Christmas time. The next day, Christmas Day, I watched my mother carefully. She managed a smile, she participated in the festivities, she even managed a laugh or two. But there was a distance in her eyes, a sadness that hadn't been there before. And when it came time to handle the box, her hands trembled more noticeably than usual. She picked it up, carried it into the living room, sat on the couch with it on her lap, just like always. She sat there for a long time, longer than usual, staring into the empty space inside the box, her expression unreadable. I sat across the room, pretending to read a book, but my eyes were fixed on her. I felt a pang of sympathy, a desire to reach out, to offer comfort, to ask what was wrong. But I held back. I didn't know what to say, how to approach such a delicate, complex situation. I was caught between my childhood curiosity and my adult understanding that some doors are better left unopened, some secrets are better left buried. Finally, she stood up, carried the box back into the kitchen, and placed it on the counter, just like she had done in years past. She didn't open it. She just left it there, empty and silent, a stark reminder of the unspoken pain that hovered over our family, even in the midst of holiday cheer. That Christmas, the mystery of the empty box took on a new dimension. It wasn't just about a tradition anymore. It was about grief, about hidden sorrow, about the ways in which families carry burdens, sometimes together, sometimes alone. It was about the unspoken things that shape us, the silent tears that fall in the privacy of our homes, the secrets that bind us in ways we can't always articulate. I started to piece things together, slowly, carefully, like assembling a puzzle with missing pieces. The empty spot on the tree, the empty box under the tree, were they connected? Was there a deeper meaning, a hidden story that linked them both? I started asking more questions, not about the box itself, but about my parents, past, about their marriage, about the events that had shaped their lives. My mother was evasive, as always, deflecting with a change of subject or a gentle pat on the hand. "It's nothing, honey," she'd say, her voice soft, her eyes avoiding mine. "Just memories." My father, on the other hand, was more direct, but no less cryptic. "Some things are best left in the past," he'd say, his voice gruff, his eyes fixed on the floor. I pressed further, fueled by my growing awareness of the pain the box seemed to represent. "Dad, was there something that happened around Christmas?" I asked one night, long after the holidays had passed, when we were sitting in the living room, the fake pine scent long since faded. He looked up, surprised by my question, surprised that I knew or suspected something was amiss. He hesitated for a long time, searching for the right words or perhaps searching for the courage to speak them. Finally, he sighed, a deep, resonant sound that echoed in the quiet room. "Your mother and we had a miscarriage," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Right before Christmas, 20 years ago." The words hit me like a physical blow. A miscarriage. The pieces clicked into place, suddenly and brutally. The empty spot on the tree, the empty box under the tree, they weren't just random traditions. They were symbols, representations of a loss so profound, so painful, that my parents had found solace in creating rituals around it. Rituals that allowed them to acknowledge the absence, to grieve in their own private way, year after year. Why the box? I asked, my voice barely audible. "It was her gift," my father said, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall, his expression distant, lost in the past. "She was going to give me a watch. A beautiful, expensive watch she'd been saving up for. She was so excited, planning this big surprise." He paused, swallowed hard. Then it happened. The miscarriage. Everything fell apart. The excitement, the plans, the future, it all just stopped. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a sadness so deep, so raw, that it stole my breath. I still had the box. The one the watch was supposed to come in. Empty, just like everything else. He paused again, gathering his thoughts. We didn't talk about it for a long time. Didn't talk about the baby, didn't talk about the loss. It was too painful. So we started the tradition. The empty spot on the tree, the empty box under the tree. It was our way of acknowledging it, our way of grieving without having to say the words. He sighed again, a heavier sigh this time, as if releasing a burden he'd carried for decades. It's hard, to lose that hope, that expectation. To have this empty space where something precious was supposed to be. The box, it's a reminder. A painful reminder, yes, but also a reminder that we loved, that we lost, that we survived. I sat there, speechless, my mind reeling. The mystery was solved in a way. The empty box wasn't about a missing ornament or a quirky tradition. It was about loss, about grief, about the unspoken pain that had shaped my parents' lives, that had subtly influenced my own. It was a symbol of a love that had been, a life that had been lost, a future that had never come to be. But even as I understood the origin of the tradition, the mystery didn't entirely dissipate. It transformed, shifting from a question of what is this, to a question of how do we live with this? How do we carry the weight of such profound loss? How do we integrate it into our lives, our memories, our traditions, without letting it consume us? How do we find a way to grieve, to remember, to move forward all at the same time? My parents had found their way, their private ritual, their empty box. It was a tangible representation of their pain, a physical manifestation of their unspoken grief. And yet, they managed to carry on, to build a life, to raise children, to find moments of joy amidst the shadow of their loss. It was a testament to their resilience, to their love for each other, to their ability to find meaning even in the darkest of circumstances. The years that followed brought a new understanding to our family's Christmas traditions. The empty spot on the tree, the empty box under the tree, they no longer felt like oddities, like quirks without explanation. They felt like sacred spaces, like memorials to a love and a life that had been, like reminders that life is complex, that joy and sorrow can coexist, that love can endure even in the face of loss. I started to participate in the tradition differently. I no longer saw it as a mystery to be solved, but as a ritual to be shared, a way of honoring my parents' pain, of acknowledging the loss that had shaped our family in ways both seen and unseen. When my mother picked up the box, I'd offer a quiet word of support, a gentle touch on the arm. When she sat with it, I'd sit with her in silence, offering my presence, my understanding, my love. The box remained empty, of course. It always would. But its emptiness no longer felt like a void. It felt like a presence, a silent testament to a love that had been, a life that had been lost, a family that had endured. It was a symbol of the unspoken things that bind us, the painful memories that shape us, the profound love that carries us through even the darkest of times. And as the years went by, and I started my own family, I found myself wondering about the traditions we would create, the rituals we would uphold, the memories we would make. But I knew that whatever traditions we created, whatever memories we made, they would be built on a foundation of love, of understanding, of the kind of resilience that my parents had shown me year after year. Through the simple, profound act of keeping a box empty, keeping a space on the tree bare, keeping alive the memory of a love that had been. Would we have our own empty box, our own unspoken symbol of loss, of grief, of love? I didn't know. A life that had been lost, but a love that had never truly left them. The scent of pine needles, crushed underfoot, still fills the air whenever I think of that box. It's the scent of Christmas, yes, but it's also the scent of love and loss, of memory and resilience, of the complex, beautiful, often painful tapestry that is family. And every year, as the holidays approach, I find myself thinking about that empty box, no longer with curiosity, but with a deep sense of reverence, a profound understanding of the love and the loss it represents. It's a story of a family secret, wrapped tight, not in ribbon and paper, but in the unspoken moments, the quiet gestures, the shared pain, and the enduring love that defines us, even in our emptiest of spaces. The revelation about the miscarriage, the watch, the empty box, it changed everything, didn't it? Or rather, it clarified everything that had been shifting and shifting beneath the surface all those years. The mystery didn't vanish, not entirely, but it transformed. It wasn't about what was in the box anymore, but about why it remained empty, why it hung over our family gatherings like a silent, unspoken requiem. The weight of it settled on me differently then. Before, it was the weight of curiosity, a child's need to understand the inexplicable. Now, it was heavier. It was the weight of shared sorrow, of inherited pain, of knowing something profound and tragic that my parents had, in their own way, tried to shield me from. It's funny how expectations work, isn't it? Especially around a time like Christmas, when the pressure to be joyful, to be perfect, to project an image of familial harmony is almost suffocating. There's an unspoken script we're all meant to follow. The laughter, the carols, the perfectly decorated house, the effortlessly prepared meal, the thoughtful gifts exchanged with smiles and gratitude. And for years, my parents, bless them, tried desperately to follow that script, even while carrying the crushing weight of their secret grief. The empty box under the tree became part of that performance, a counterpoint to the festive chaos, a silent reminder that the script wasn't quite right, that there were lines being omitted, emotions being suppressed. I remember one Christmas, after I knew the truth, I watched my father trying to assemble the fake tree. He was usually grumbling, cursing the confusing instructions, but that year, his movements were slower, more deliberate. His hands, usually quick and sometimes rough, seemed unsure, hesitant. He stopped mid-assembly, just staring at a branch, his brow furrowed in concentration, but not the kind of concentration you need for following pictograms. It was a deeper kind of concentration, the kind that comes when you're lost in thought, lost in memory. I went over to help like I used to when I was a kid. I reached for a branch, ready to snap it into place. "Need a hand, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, natural. He jumped slightly, as if startled out of a trance. He looked at me, then at the branch, then back at me. "Oh, yeah, thanks," he mumbled, his eyes avoiding mine. He took the branch from me, fiddled with it for a moment, then managed a weak smile. Just having a moment. We finished assembling the tree in silence, the usual easy banter missing between us. It wasn't awkward exactly, but it was heavy. The air felt thick with unspoken things, my knowledge of their loss, his probable awareness that I knew, the shared understanding of the performance we were about to undertake. The tree went up, the ornaments were hung, the fake pine scent filled the living room. It looked, superficially, like any other Christmas tree. Festive, brightly lit, covered in the accumulated clutter of decades of family life. Except for that one spot, right there on the upper right branch, 2/3 of the way up. My mother found it immediately, her eyes lingering on the emptiness for a beat longer than necessary. She picked up the last ornament, a tarnished silver bell that had belonged to her grandmother, and carefully hung it on a different branch, further down. She didn't comment on the empty space, didn't need to. It was understood. That year, the expectation of Christmas joy felt even more oppressive. Knowing what I knew, the cheerful greetings from relatives, the forced laughter, the generic pleasantries about wonderful holidays, grated on my nerves in a way they never had before. I found myself bristling, wanting to scream, "Don't you see? Don't you see what we're pretending doesn't exist?" But I didn't, of course. I played my part. I smiled when smiled at, I laughed when laughter was expected, I helped carry in the food, I exchanged gifts with my brothers, even as my eyes kept straying to that empty box under the tree. My mother picked it up, as per tradition. She carried it into the living room, sat on the couch with it on her lap. This time, I sat on the floor opposite her, not reading a book or pretending to be occupied, but just sitting. Our eyes met for a moment. There was no need for words. A silent acknowledgement passed between us, the acknowledgement of the sorrow, the acknowledgement of the performance we were both engaged in, the acknowledgement of the love that somehow endured despite it all. She sat with the box for a long time that year, longer than usual. I watched her fingers trace the edges of the cardboard, watched the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, the way a shadow seemed to cross her face whenever she looked up. The box felt heavier than ever before, not just as an object, but as a symbol. It represented the weight of their loss, yes, but it also represented the weight of expectation they carried year after year. The expectation to be okay, to be festive, to be the perfect grieving family that still managed to celebrate. It was an impossible burden, and seeing them carry it, knowing the depth of their pain, was heartbreaking. Finally, she stood up. She didn't open the box. She just carried it back into the kitchen, placed it on the counter, and for a moment, we all stood there, in the bustling kitchen filled with the smells of roasting turkey and baking pies, and the empty box seemed to pulse with a silent, mournful rhythm, out of sync with the festive beat of the day. That Christmas, the weight of expectation felt like a physical thing, pressing down on all of us. My parents, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy, trying to shield us from their pain, even though I knew now, trying to uphold a tradition of joy in the face of profound loss. My brothers, oblivious to the deeper meaning, caught up in the usual teenage hormones and gift exchanges, feeling the unspoken tension but not quite understanding its source. And me, caught in the middle, knowing the truth, feeling the weight of their sorrow, feeling the pressure of the expectation to be joyful, feeling the pull to somehow alleviate their pain, but having no idea how. I started to wonder about my own expectations around Christmas. Had I always carried them, even before I knew the truth? Had I always felt this subtle pressure to match the festive spirit, to downplay any sadness or disappointment, to present a version of myself that was brighter, happier, more in tune with the season's supposed cheer? Maybe the empty box, even in its mystery, had always been a subversive symbol for me. A little reminder that not everything is perfect, that expectations can be burdensome, that sometimes the most authentic moments are the ones that don't quite fit the script. After Christmas that year, as the tree came down, the ornaments got boxed up, and the house slowly returned to its pre-holiday state, I found myself reflecting on the weight of expectation. It's not just about Christmas, is it? It's about life in general. We carry expectations about ourselves, about others, about how things should be. We expect happiness to look a certain way, success to feel a certain way, love to manifest in predictable patterns. And when reality doesn't match the expectation, when there's an empty box in the midst of our carefully curated lives, we feel lost, inadequate, as if something is wrong with us. My parents had created a tradition out of their unmet expectation. The expectation of a child, the expectation of giving and receiving that perfect gift, the expectation of an undisturbed, joyous Christmas. The empty box became their way of holding space for that unmet expectation, for that profound loss, without letting it completely consume them. It was a way of saying, this is what we expected, this is what we lost, and this is how we're learning to live with it, even now, in the midst of this other expectation, this societal demand to be festive and happy. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? How do we honor our pain without letting it define us? How do we participate in the world's expectations without sacrificing our own truth? How do we carry the weight of our losses, our secrets, our sorrows, without letting them crush us? My parents seem to have found a way, at least partially. They didn't let the empty box stop them from celebrating, from loving, from building a life. They found a way to integrate the pain, to make it part of their story, not the entirety of it. But the expectation never fully goes away, does it? Even now, years later, even knowing the story behind the box, the weight of expectation can still feel heavy. The expectation to find the perfect gift, to create the perfect holiday, to be the perfect child, the perfect sibling, the perfect partner, the perfect human being. It's a pressure that society, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly, puts on us, especially during times meant for joy and connection. And the empty spaces in our lives, the losses, the unmet expectations, the secrets, the sorrows, they can feel even heavier under that pressure. The scent of crushed pine needles still brings it all back, doesn't it? That strange, artificial scent that was uniquely ours during the holidays. It doesn't just bring back memories of the tree, of the presents, of the laughter. It brings back the memory of the weight, the expectation, the unspoken sorrow. It's a scent tied to a complex tapestry of emotions, joy and grief, expectation and reality, presence and absence, and the empty box under the tree. It's more than just a symbol of loss now. It's a symbol of the struggle to reconcile expectation and reality, to find meaning in the midst of pain, to carry burdens without being defined by them. It's a reminder that life is messy, that love is complicated, that traditions are often born from a need to make sense of the senseless, to find a way to move forward even when pieces are missing. The weight of expectation is something we all carry, in different ways, at different times. Sometimes it's light, almost imperceptible. Sometimes, like during those Christmases with my parents and the empty box, it feels heavy, oppressive, almost unbearable. But perhaps, just perhaps, the key isn't to get rid of the weight because we can't. The key is in how we carry it. In how we acknowledge it, in how we share it, in how we find ways to keep stepping forward, even when every step feels heavy. My parents carried that weight, year after year, with a resilience that still amazes me. They allowed themselves moments of grief, moments of remembrance, moments of acknowledging the empty space, even while trying to uphold the expectation of the festive season. They found a way to be present in their sorrow and present in their joy, simultaneously. It's a lesson I'm still learning, still trying to apply to my own life, my own expectations, my own empty spaces. The box remains empty, of course. It's a physical manifestation of an unmet expectation, a lost hope, a profound love that endured despite it all. But the weight it carries, the weight of expectation and reality, sorrow and love, loss and presence, that weight is something we all bear in our own ways. It's the weight of being human, of navigating a world that often asks us to be more, to feel more, to expect more, than perhaps we're capable of delivering, or perhaps than is even necessary. And as the holidays approach again, the scent of pine, real or artificial, seems to hang in the air earlier, the anticipation building, the expectations rising. I find myself thinking about that empty box, not just as a symbol of my parents' loss, but as a universal symbol. A symbol of all the unmet expectations we carry, of all the silent sorrows we navigate, of all the weights we bear while still trying to celebrate, to love, to live. It's a reminder that the most meaningful connections often happen in the spaces between the expectations, in the quiet moments of shared understanding, in the brave act of carrying on despite the weight. But what happens when that weight becomes too much to bear alone? And how do we, as a family, as a community, support each other when the expectations of the world feel impossible to meet, especially in the face of our own profound losses? The empty box suggests a solitary burden, but perhaps its true legacy is in how it brought my parents together in their grief, in how it eventually allowed me to understand and support them. The question now is, how do we extend that understanding and support outward to carry each other's weights, not just our own? The scent of pine lingers, but the air feels heavy with a question waiting to be answered. The weight of the empty box, the weight of expectation, the weight of the unspoken, it all converged in those quiet moments around the tree, didn't it? After the initial flurry of Christmas Day had died down, after the presents were opened, the food was consumed, the obligatory visits from relatives had concluded, there was a lull. A space in time that felt both expansive and confining, a pause that hung heavy in the air, thick with the lingering scent of pine needles, roasted turkey, and the ghosts of conversations past. And in that space, the empty box under the tree and the empty space on the highest right branch seemed to pulse with a silent insistence, demanding to be felt, to be acknowledged, to be understood. It wasn't about the object itself anymore. The box was just cardboard, the ornament was just glass. The physicality of it was secondary to the feeling it evoked, the presence it represented in its very absence. It was about the void, the lack, the missing. And what was missing wasn't just a gift, a child, a perfectly decorated spot on the tree. What was missing was a kind of fullness, a completeness that life, inevitably, rarely offers. It was the missing piece in the narrative of their love story, the missing note in the melody of their family Christmas. I remember one of those lulls particularly vividly. We were in the living room, the lights from the fake tree casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The wrapping paper had been gathered, though some stray scraps still littered the floor like colorful confetti from a forgotten parade. The turkey carcass rested in the sink, a testament to the feast. My brothers were sprawled on the floor, engrossed in a video game, their adolescent energy a stark contrast to the stillness settling over the rest of the room. My father was reading the newspaper, his brow furrowed in concentration, a shield behind which he often hid. And my mother. My mother was sitting on the couch, the empty box placed delicately on the coffee table in front of her, not under the tree this time, as if the weight of the day, the weight of the memory, was too much to bear just yet. I sat on the armchair opposite her, a book open on my lap, though I wasn't reading. My eyes kept straying to her, to the box, to the way the dim light from the tree caught the edges of the cardboard, making it seem almost ethereal, almost sacred. There was no malice in the silence between us. It wasn't uncomfortable in the way awkward silences usually are. It was more like shared reverence in a holy space, the way you might feel in a cathedral, surrounded by history and mystery, your breath held in awe or perhaps in apprehension. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. They weren't sad exactly. Not broken, not weepy. They were tired, yes, and there was a depth of weariness in them that I hadn't noticed before, a kind of hollowed-out quality that spoke of decades of carrying this burden, not just during Christmas, but throughout the year, layering it onto the already heavy mantle of daily life. But beneath the tiredness, there was something else. A flicker of something resilient, something enduring. A quiet strength that had somehow managed to survive, to even thrive despite the absence. "Remember that time," she said, her voice soft, almost tentative, breaking the silence. It wasn't about the box. It wasn't about the miscarriage. It was about something else entirely, a diversion, a lifeline thrown into the chasm of sorrow. When Mark set off the stink bomb in the church basement during the Easter pageant, he was supposed to be playing a shepherd, all in white, with a little crook. And suddenly, the whole basement just reeked. Like rotten eggs and onions, multiplied by 100. The poor director nearly fainted. Your father had to go up there and retrieve him, his face bright red, trying not to laugh. She managed a small smile, a genuine one this time, though it quickly faded. Your father, she added, looking at me with an almost wistful fondness, was never one for drama, especially not public drama. I laughed, a real laugh this time, the memory surfacing clearly in my mind. Mark, always the prankster, always pushing boundaries, even in the most solemn of places. My father, always trying to maintain a semblance of control, even when everything around him was spiraling into chaos. It was a familiar story, one that felt safe, one that anchored us back to the everyday, the normalcy, the parts of our lives that weren't defined by loss or sorrow. But the moment passed. The smile left her face, and she looked back at the empty box on the table. The safe ground of shared memory couldn't hold forever. The gravity of the room pulled us back towards the center, towards the weight we both carried. "It's okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper, looking at the box, not at me. "It's okay that it's empty." It wasn't a statement of fact. It was a statement of permission, a granting of grace, both to herself and, perhaps, to me. It was the first time she'd said it out loud, not just smiled and moved on. The first time she'd verbalized that the emptiness was acceptable, was part of the design, not a flaw. It was a small thing, almost insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it felt monumental in that moment. It felt like a release, a small crack appearing in the dam holding back the emotions. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to something so profound, so deeply personal, expressed in such a quiet, understated way? Yeah, I finally managed, my voice equally soft. It is. And it was. The emptiness wasn't a void to be filled, it was a space to be acknowledged, a memory to be honored, a love to be remembered in its absence. We sat there for a few more minutes, a silent understanding passing between us. The box remained on the table, a focal point, but no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a conversation starter, a way into the difficult emotions, a tangible link to the shared history, the shared sorrow, the shared love that bound us. It was an unspoken promise, really. A promise that the memory would be held, that the loss would be acknowledged, that the love wouldn't be forgotten, even in the emptiness. And that promise, that act of holding space for the unspoken, felt like a bridge across the chasm of unacknowledged grief. That Christmas, the tradition with the box felt different. My mother still picked it up, still carried it into the living room, still sat with it on her lap. But there was less formality, less ritualistic weight to it. She didn't sit for an extended period, lost in thought. She didn't seem burdened by it. Instead, she opened the lid, and this time she didn't close it immediately. She just let it sit there open, empty, for all of us to see. And then she did something she'd never done before. She spoke. It was a watch, she said, her voice steady, calm. A roll, a nice watch. She was going to give him a nice watch. She nodded towards my father, who was still reading his newspaper, seemingly oblivious, though I knew he was listening, always listening during those moments. For Father's Day, I think, or maybe Christmas, time blurs when you lose time. She paused, looking down into the empty box. She was so proud of it, saved up for it for months. She showed it to me. The box, she said, "Look, Mom, isn't it beautiful? He'll love it." And she did. It was beautiful, velvet lining, engraved plaque. Her voice trailed off, lost in the memory. And then, she shook her head slightly, a gesture that conveyed the finality of the event, the suddenness, the sheer cruelty of it. And then it wasn't. She closed the lid then, the movement deliberate, final. She looked around the room, her gaze encompassing all of us, my brothers, still engrossed in their game, oblivious to the quiet, emotional earthquake happening around them, my father carefully folding his newspaper, his hand steady, me holding my breath, waiting. "We keep the box," she said, her voice firm now, no longer hesitant. "Not because we need to be sad, not because we can't move on. We keep it because..." She hesitated again, searching for the right words. "Because she would have wanted us to. Because it reminds us of her, of the love, of the life that was. And because..." She looked directly at me, her eyes holding mine, a deep, profound connection passing between us in that moment. Because love isn't just about presence, or memories, or even the people who are physically present. Love is also about the presence we feel in their absence. About the promise that even when someone is gone, the love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. She picked up the box, the movement fluid, natural, no longer heavy. She carried it back into the kitchen, as she always did, but this time there was a sense of peace about it, a resolution. That night, lying in my bed, the house quiet around me, I thought about her words. The presence we feel in their absence. It resonated deeply, not just with the story of the empty box, but with life in general. We often think of presence as physical, as being there in the same room, sharing the same air. But is it possible to feel a presence even when someone is physically gone? Can love create a kind of energetic space? A feeling, a knowing, that remains even when the physical body is no longer there. The empty box under the tree, the empty space on the limb, they were physical manifestations of absence. But my mother was suggesting, perhaps, that they were also manifestations of a different kind of presence, a spiritual or emotional presence, a love that transcended the physical. It was a complicated, almost mystical idea, but it felt right. It felt true. It changed how I viewed the empty box, how I viewed the unspoken things in my life, how I viewed presence itself. It wasn't just about being there. It was about feeling the weight, the love, the connection, regardless of physical proximity or physical existence. It was about acknowledging the voids, the absences, without letting them consume us. It was about finding the presence in the absence, the love in the loss, the connection in the separation. The scent of crushed pine needles still hangs in my mind when I think of that Christmas, but now, intertwined with it, is the scent of possibility, of understanding, of a love that endures not in spite of absence, but perhaps, in a paradoxical way, because of it. The empty box became less of a mystery, less of a burden, and more of a symbol of that enduring presence. A promise that even in our emptiest moments, we are not truly alone, that love can fill spaces in ways we can't always comprehend. The empty box under the tree wasn't just about my parents' story. It became a touchstone for me, a reminder that presence is multifaceted, that love is resilient, that even when the world feels empty, there can still be a profound sense of presence, a feeling of being held, a knowing that the connections we forge are not easily, nor completely. And as the years have gone by, and I've had my own experiences with loss, with absence, with the feeling of something missing, I find myself returning to that lesson. Broken by absence. The box remains empty, of course. Each Christmas, if I visit my parents, or if I decorate my own tree and hang that specific empty space with intention, the symbolism remains. It's a reminder of a love that endured profound loss, a love that found a way to express itself even in an empty box, a love that created a tradition out of absence, turning it into a space for remembrance, for connection, for the unspoken promise that presence can be felt, even in the deepest of absences. But the question lingers, doesn't it? If the promise is one of presence felt in absence, how do we ensure that promise extends beyond the private sphere of family grief, into the wider world where such absences are often met with silence and isolation, rather than shared understanding and support? The empty box hints at a private solace, but what about the communal need to feel present together, especially in the face of collective loss or widespread absence? The scent of pine lingers, the promise resonates, but the question of how to make that promise universally felt remains, waiting to be addressed. The promise in the absence, the presence felt in the void, these ideas swirled in my mind long after the last ornament was packed away, long after the last Christmas carol faded into memory. It wasn't just about the empty box anymore, not really. It was about the why. Why keep something so stark, so painfully obvious, so fundamentally empty? Why not just let the memory exist internally, tucked away in the private chambers of hearts and minds? Why make it a physical, tangible thing that we had to confront, year after year, amidst the glitter and the tinsel and the forced cheer? I remember another Christmas, perhaps the one when my grandmother passed. My mother's own mother, the one who'd made those glittery ornaments, the one whose memory was so intertwined with the spot on the tree, was gone now. That year, the weight felt different. The empty box under the tree, the empty space on the highest branch, they seemed to resonate with an even deeper hollow, a chasm that the addition of another loss seemed to widen. The tradition felt heavier, more somber. It felt less like a quiet acknowledgement and more like a fresh wound being pried open. My mother, grief now etched deeper around her eyes, her shoulders slumped in a way they hadn't been since the miscarriage, perhaps. She looked at the box, really looked at it, on Christmas morning, as we all stood around the tree, the usual excitement muted by the knowledge of what was to come. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice thin, almost lost in the background noise of rustling paper and muffled laughter. It wasn't the same "it's okay" that it's empty. It was different. It was "it's okay. We go on." A statement of resilience, a silent agreement between us, acknowledging the fresh hurt, the enduring one, the way grief layers upon grief, the way absence builds upon absence. That Christmas, she didn't open the box. She didn't sit with it. She just left it there, under the tree, a silent sentinel, as she went through the motions of the day. The unspoken promise felt less like a comforting presence and more like a stark reminder of fragility, of the precariousness of life, of the way love and loss are inextricably bound. The presence felt less like a warm embrace and more like a cold draft seeping in around the edges of our holiday cheer. It was a necessary burden, perhaps, but a heavy one. This brings us to the essence, doesn't it? The core of the empty box, the core of the unspoken, the core of the promise in absence. It's about love beyond the material. The ornament on the tree, the gift under it. We spend so much time, energy, money, emotion on the things. The perfect gift, the perfect meal, the perfect decorations. We measure our love often by the size of the present, the sentiment of the card, the effort behind the gesture. But the empty box, the empty space, they were the ultimate rejection of that. They were the ultimate statement that love couldn't, and didn't need to, be contained, quantified, or even filled. They were statements that love existed, that love mattered, and that its absence left a space, a void, that no material thing could ever truly fill. They were the physical manifestations of a love that was, is, and continues to be beyond the material. I started thinking about this a lot, about the things we hold on to. Not just the physical things, but the memories, the stories, the experiences. The love we carry in our hearts, the love that shapes us, the love that sometimes feels like a phantom limb, a ghost in the machine of our lives. The empty box wasn't just about a lost pregnancy or a lost parent. It became, in my understanding, a symbol of all the love that doesn't fit neatly into a box, doesn't come with a price tag, doesn't arrive wrapped in paper and ribbon. It's the love that endures, the love that persists even when the person is gone, the love that changes form but never truly disappears. It's the love that holds us together, even when pieces are missing. It's the love that allows us to find meaning in the most unexpected places, the most unlikely forms. And that's the hook, isn't it? The real hook? It's the realization that the most profound love isn't always the one we can see, the one we can touch, the one we can gift wrap. It's the love that endures in the empty spaces, the love that persists in the unspoken, the love that reminds us, year after year, that even when the box is empty, even when the space is bare, even when the person is absent, the presence can still be felt, the connection still be real. It's a love that transcends the material, the tangible, the expected. It's a love that asks us to look beyond the surface, to feel the depth, to understand that the most beautiful relationships, the most enduring connections, often lie not in the gifts we give or receive, but in the empty spaces they occupy, in the memories they hold, in the love that remains. And as the holiday season approaches again, as the scent of pine, real or artificial, begins to drift through the air, the question lingers. How do we honor that love that persists in the emptiness? Not just in our own private grief, but in the face of the collective, the societal pressure to fill every void, to present a perfect, materially filled picture. The empty box under the tree is just the beginning. It's a call to recognize, to honor, to truly feel the love that dwells not in the things we possess, but in the spaces they cannot reach. The story isn't just about an empty box, but about the love that made that box necessary, the love that continues to resonate in its void, a profound, unspoken, non-material force that we must learn to feel, to cherish, to live with always. The presence in the absence, the love beyond the material, that's the story, and that's the ongoing journey. The empty box is just the prologue to the ongoing narrative of love's enduring presence in the spaces it leaves behind. The emptiness, the void, these aren't just about the physical. They're about the space where words fail, where explanations fall short, where the weight of unspoken words, of unspoken acts, of unspoken pain resides. The empty box, the empty space on the tree, they became, for me, symbols not of what was missing, but of what was present in that missingness. It's the love that cannot be contained, cannot be expressed in material terms, cannot be neatly wrapped. It's the love that endure, the love that persists, the love that changes form but never disappears. It's the love that holds us, binds us, shapes us, even when the people, the things, the moments are gone. The love in the space, the love in the absence, that's the story, and that's the journey. And as the holiday season approaches, as the scent of pine, real or artificial, begins to drift through the air once more, the question remains, not just for the personal grief, but for the collective, the societal expectation of perfect, materially filled spaces. The empty box under the tree is just the beginning. It's a call to feel, to honor, to truly feel the love that dwells not in the things we possess, but in the spaces they cannot reach. The story isn't just about an empty box, but about the love that made that box necessary, the love that continues to resonate in its emptiness, in its quiet persistence. It's an unspoken, non-material presence that we must feel, cherish, embrace always. The presence in the absence, the love in the matter, that's the story, and that's the ongoing narrative of love's enduring presence in the spaces it leaves behind. It is the story of a love that endures, not despite the absence, but perhaps in the absence. The empty box is just the prologue to the larger narrative of love's enduring presence in the spaces it leaves behind. It's the story of a love that is felt, is real, is constant, is more profound than any gift, any material possession, any spoken word. It's the love that is, that was, and that will be beyond the material, beyond the explained, beyond the understood. It's the love in the empty spaces, the love that persists, the love that is the real gift, the real presence, the real story, always. It's the story of love beyond the material, and that's the story that truly matters always. The story isn't just about an empty box. It's about the love that made that box necessary, the love that resonates in its emptiness, the love that persists in its void. It's an unspoken, non-material presence that we must acknowledge, cherish, and live with always. The presence in the absence, the love in the material, that's the story, and that's the lesson. The empty box is just the prologue to the larger narrative of love's enduring presence in the spaces it leaves behind. It's the story of a love that is felt, is real, is constant, is more profound than any gift, any material possession, any spoken word. It's the love that is, that was, and that will be in the material, in the unsaid, beyond the understood. It's the love in the spaces, the love that persists, the love that is the real thing, the real presence, the real story, always. It's the story of love beyond the material, and that's the story that truly matters always.